Do not ask me why they made us do this, but I swear it is the truth. They made us get into the swamp.
This is We Bleed Orange and Black, the podcast for Halloween and horror lovers. Join us as we interview creators, discuss our favorite horrors, and share original spooky stories. I'm Jeff C. Carter, and this week we're talking with Rae Knowles about her debut novel, The Stradivarius. Rae Knowles is a queer author with short stories published by Dark Matter Inc., Seize the Press, Nose Touch Press, and Taco Bell Quarterly. She is also the editor-in-chief of Brigade Gate Press's new erotic horror imprint, Lady Mantis Books. Welcome to the show, Rae.
Thank you so much for having me.
Wouldst thou like to live deliciously?
Oh, yes. I love the taste of butter, a pretty dress. So 100%. And that's one of my favorite movie quotes of all time.
I feel like so many people tuned out of The Witch before that happened. If you could plot that movie, which I loved all of it kind of equally, but if you could plot the insanity of that movie, it's like a hockey stick L-curve chart, a long runway, and then a very steep takeoff at the end.
No, absolutely. I mean, to me, the whole movie is worth watching just for that one line and then the chaos that ensues shortly afterward, but it's brilliant.
So Rae, can you tell us a bit about yourself? Where did you grow up, and what were some of the cartoons, comics, toys, movies, or books that freaked you out at a tender age?
I'm a native Floridian, born and raised in South Florida, and gosh, when I think about I didn't really watch quote unquote horror as a child. But I did watch, do you remember the movie Mars Attacks?
Of course.
Comedy. Okay. I saw it. Yes, exactly. I saw it. I was probably 6 years old. And the comedy was totally lost on me. And it was pure horror in my eyes. And so that's like what I think of as my first experience with horror, even though it's not in the horror genre. And I had nightmares in the whole nine. Something about being scared got my attention, and I've been an avid horror fan since maybe middle school, high school time, and since.
So how did you make the transition from being a horror fan into creating horror, trying your hand at it?
So I started writing short horror stories in high school, and of course they weren't very good. And I went to college and majored in English with a minor in creative writing. And, they don't focus at all on genre fiction in academia, at least not in the program that I was in. So, didn't do much with it. And part of my story, I'm in recovery. So I had a long period of not doing a whole lot of anything because I was really struggling with addiction. But I came into recovery in 2012, and it's sort of nagged at me the whole time that I knew I wanted to write and, continue with that craft. And it was really just a matter of when. And, sort of piecing my life together, I eventually had the bandwidth to get back into it around 2020 and really just dove in headfirst and have been having a ball ever since.
Did the pandemic create a little time and space for you to get back into it?
I know that's the case for a lot of people, and this is such a silly motivator, but it was the movie Shirley that just happened to come out around that time. I want to say it was 2020. So Shirley, I don't know if you watched it. It was a Hulu movie, I want to say, loosely based, a fictionalized version of the life of Shirley Jackson. I don't know, something about the movie. Obviously, she's a writer, and it's sort of about her working on a novel. I just watched it and I said, I'm going to write a novel. And I had never even come close to writing a novel. And I'm sure my family thought, that's weird, but sure, whatever you want. But I did. I wrote a novel and I haven't stopped writing since. I think I'm working on my fifth novel, I want to say now. So it
Wow.
was such a silly, to watch a movie and have it be that impactful. But I think it was sort of a combination of having wanted to come back for it for a while and right time, right place. So it wasn't really COVID or working from home, even though I was, because I've worked from home for a long time prior to COVID, but just all the things lining up.
I love the symmetry of that. The movies were your entry into horror, and then this final threshold that you cross to start your novel writing career, which has continued apace and quite spectacularly, I would say.
Thank you. Yeah. And funnily enough, I wasn't that familiar with Shirley Jackson's work when I saw the movie. But since then, I've explored her work and she's one of now my favorite authors. So that's just another little piece of synchronicity.
Was there anything from your BA or your minor in English and creative writing that did help you get a head start?
Oh, I'm going to say no, to be honest, right? I think, when I talk to people about going to school, my position is very much like if you need a degree to do a certain job that you really want to do, then by all means. But personally, I'm not a big believer in schooling necessarily for something like the arts or fields that maybe you're not going to make a whole ton of money. I do have even a graduate degree in social work, but I think if I could go back, I would have either been like an engineer or a bartender or something because I'm kind of just of the mind that like why spend all of this money on a piece of paper to go into a field where you're not making gobs of money. And in my experience, and I can only speak for myself, and I had a lot going on during the time that I was working on the English degree. So, listen, maybe other people are getting all sorts of stuff out of it, but I was struggling with addiction at the time. So, I don't think I did personally. I got through it, I did okay, but there's nothing that I can really point to now that I'm like, yeah, thank goodness I got this English degree.
I love the spectrum of possibilities. Engineer or bartender?
I'm so serious
The
about that.
most schooling or the least schooling?
Yeah, well, so here's my perspective. I feel like bartenders make incredible money and they
Mm.
don't have to dump a whole bunch of costs into a degree. And the engineers make incredible money. They do have to pay for a very expensive degree, but the salary will eventually sort of outweigh it. Whereas I'm sort of in like social services. There's no justification for that money I spent on graduate school. You know what I mean? I've learned the most from working with really wonderful critique partners and
Mhm.
swapping work back and forth and slush reading and just doing the thing, just writing a lot and writing badly and trying to make it a little better and maybe writing a little better the next time.
Did you start with short fiction and work your way up to novel length, or did you jump into both fields at the same time?
So I started with my, grand idea that I was going to write a novel. So that's what I did. And I'm sort of actually a private person, which may sound odd to people who know me on Twitter, but I only made Twitter to connect with a writing community because I wrote this whole novel completely in isolation. I don't know any writers in real life. I had no social media presence. So I would like watch some YouTube videos about writing, but that was my only connection with other writers, which is not great. When I got on social media, specifically on Twitter, that was when I started to find like short story calls and all this interesting stuff. So if I had to do it again, I think I would start with short stories. I think it's a really great way to play with voice and style and connect with other writers. And they're short, right? So you're not committing to this months or years long project while you build your skill set at the same time. So yeah, I started with the novel that is in the trash, that first novel, never going anywhere.
Not the trunk, the trash. It's a trash
The
novel.
trash. Yeah, no, not even worth revising at all. But then kind of got into short stories and wrote the Stradivarius.
So, Nightmare Magazine ran a column called The H Word, and you posted an essay called Healing Through Horror that lays the groundwork for understanding, or at least delving deeper into your first novel, The Stradivarius. Can you tell us a bit about this essay?
Yeah, so Wendy Wagner and I connected, and she was incredibly generous and kind to invite me to write a piece for Nightmare. And I wanted to tell this, right? This sort of personal experience that helped to motivate writing the Stradivarius and sort of where I was coming from in writing it. And at the same time, this is the first nonfiction piece I've ever written, and it's super personal. Obviously, if you've read it, you know that. So I struggled with this thing, man, to no end. I think it took months for me to get it finished. It took more months for me to even let anyone read it for feedback. It took more months. I mean, it just seemed like it dragged on and on and on for something. I don't know, it's probably 1,500 words. It's not a long thing, but I thought it was important. I'm not a stranger to telling my story. I'm in Narcotics Anonymous as part of my recovery journey. And so I tell my story of recovery there pretty often. For the past 10 years, I've been telling it, but it is a little different telling it to a community who may or may not be in recovery, right? Probably largely not in recovery, and to talk about experiences with addiction and in an abusive relationship. So I feel like I bit off a lot, but hopefully, it resonates with people. And I've gotten some tremendous feedback from folks that it did resonate with. And that certainly made it worth it to share.
It's an incredible essay, and it's still available there in Nightmare Magazine. I would encourage anyone to read it if they're interested in the Stradivarius or just in exploring the concept of gaslighting and things like that, taking the word back to its original definition and reclaiming it from the sort of the slang word that gets tossed around now. Do you think that writing that essay made you a better fiction writer moving forward? Do you think it clarified some things or just broke open some ability to share pieces of yourself publicly that would make your writing resonate in the future?
Yeah, I think both. I'm a big believer that when you do something that's a little outside your comfort zone, right, in a positive way, you always grow from that experience. So I think in that way, it's helpful. And what I hope for it is that people have a richer experience of the Stradivarius if they've also read the essay and sort of know where I'm coming from.
I think that is an invitation to dive deeper into the Stradivarius. I have a nice paragraph here, I think, from the book. The Stradivarius is a queer retelling of Patrick Hamilton's Gaslight, in which a young woman must determine whether the evil in her childhood home is real or imagined before she loses her freedom for good. In the beginning of the book, when you establish your adult character, May, you have this really elegant touch by having her stuck in the home of her aunt, who is not only a grotesque figure, but also this reprehensible conspiracy theorist. And so that casts May as the totally sensible skeptic who would never believe in some kind of broad conspiracy, which puts her off at the worst possible position for living in a conspiracy. I just wanted to give you a high five up front for that. I thought that was such a clever touch.
Thank you so much. I love listening to like podcasts related to conspiracy theories. And I wouldn't call myself a conspiracy theory believer per se, but I'm fascinated with like learning about unusual beliefs in all their forms. So cults, conspiracy theories, and I really just wanted to include a character that believed in conspiracies. And the aunts seemed like the perfect fit for that. And, I of course needed an impetus for May to return to her childhood home, and it just seemed like a fit.
This is a retelling of Gaslight, and you've brought in these things like this era of conspiracy theory, which we are living through, and things like true crime podcasts. It feels like those are very modern, believable elements. You show me a story about a murder, I'll show you someone listening to a podcast about a murder.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm a huge fan of true crime podcasts. So again, just wanting to weave it in. And, another part of the inspiration for this particular way of retelling Gaslight with a Stradivarius was one of the true crime podcasts that I listened to. talked about a story in which, and I'll probably get the details wrong, so forgive me, but essentially, someone who owned a very expensive Stradivarius violin went on vacation and asked, I believe it was a neighbor, to watch their house because they had this, incredibly expensive instrument there. And they were unfortunately tortured and for the location of the certificate of authenticity and killed over the Stradivarius violin. And obviously a horrific story, but it really stuck with me, the starkness of such violence and atrocity over something as beautiful as a violin. So that was sort of part of my melding together of this novel. Yeah, so, true crime is a natural fit.
Are you a fan of classical music, or did you just get that all from research?
So I wouldn't say I'm a huge fan of classical music. There are certainly pieces that I love, and I won't even try to say his Italian name because I will undoubtedly butcher it. But the song Experience is a classical piece that I have listened to umpteen times. Highly recommend. I'm sure if anyone Googles Experience classical music, it will come right up. So yeah, no, I did quite a bit of research, specifically into classical pieces that are played on the violin, because I think that's its own layer of specificity, and also just into the world of rare violins, which was really interesting.
I'm sure.
I watched videos of professionals describing violins to hear, how they would talk about it and what they would find striking, and describe violin performances to hear how do they talk about that, like in what words, because they're not just saying it was good, they have these really specific things that they're looking for. So it involves quite a bit of research.
You weave a lot of musical terminology into the prose in a way that describes or heightens the sensations or someone's heartbeat, things like that. And I thought that was very effective. And I was like, oh, is Rae a classically trained violinist? I'm convinced.
Thank you. I'm not at all. But I appreciate that because it was certainly my intention. And I will say, my dad is a Grammy Award winning guitarist. So I do have music in the family, just not me personally.
It skipped a generation.
Yeah.
So you introduce LSD as a factor in the story. At about the same time, you bring in MK Ultra, which is crazy conspiracy thinking, but twist, MK Ultra actually turned out to be a real life conspiracy. Were you always trying to keep the reader guessing by layering in these levels of conspiracy and reality and unreality?
Of course, I never want a reader to feel like I saw every twist coming or anything like that. So I did want there to be some surprises, but I will say it wasn't my intention with this book for it to be one of those, oh my gosh, that twist novels. What I was really going for with the layers that you just talked about was the tension between is it real or not real in different layers of the story. And having the conflict of having to grapple with that, of not understanding what of the narrative and what of May's experience is real or imagined. So I tried to do that in some different ways, including incorporating LSD, incorporating the conspiracy theories, incorporating, all the other elements. She's seeing things, hearing things, who's lying, who's telling the truth.
As May is losing touch with reality or receiving messages, seeing visions and specters, she arranges a seance. You tease us with the idea that we're going to get some information from the psychics, and then you just string that out. You never tie up that thread. Every time they could get a clear answer from the psychic is chased off or they're interrupted. Sometimes we layer things into our writing that we know the answer to that don't necessarily get presented in the book. Do you have, for yourself personally, some kind of answer about whether or not there was a psychic connection there, whether they did sense something?
This may be a bit of a spoiler, but in my mind, the psychic was always a fraud.
Ah,
Sort of a lovable fraud. And I don't think I make that explicit in the text at all, but that was certainly in my mind as I was writing it. But, she's just a funky woman in this small town trying to make a buck.
that's hilarious. So once the check cleared and she gets interrupted or chased off, she just bolts and she's like, yeah,
Yeah.
I already got paid.
Exactly. Works for me. No big deal. I'm out.
That is funny because it reinforces the themes of gaslighting and manipulation and lying and deceit for gain.
Yeah.
It's all of a piece, and I applaud you for that as well.
Thank you. I think my other thinking is I really needed May to figure this out on her own, right? I couldn't have anyone hand her the answer, even if she had to really go through the ringer to get there.
Do you think that May's story will eventually get adapted into a true crime podcast and it will become this recursive loop with Ollie listening to the story?
I would love it. Yeah. No, that's very meta. And that's a really cool idea. I'll have to consider maybe writing a short story as like some bonus content of the true crime podcast version.
That would be hilarious. Ivy comes back to get the person who's doing the true crime podcast.
Yeah. I love Ivy. Ivy's my favorite character. If anybody had a spin-off, it would be Ivy.
So for the listener, Ivy is a co-conspirator, but she's not entirely black and white. She's really a mirror for May. In another life, May could have wound up like Ivy. In many, many ways, their lives overlap and are affected by the same relationships.
Yeah, thank you for picking up on that. That's absolutely what I set out to do with the difference between those characters, May and Ivy, is Ivy's sort of a potential future version of May, depending on the choices May makes.
You mentioned in your essay how writing horror and specifically fictionalizing or gaming out certain scenarios that you've lived through and are still trying to find closure with is helpful and therapeutic. At the end of your project, the Stradivarius, did you feel some kind of closure or did you feel a unique perspective on this tangled knot of issues that you were grappling with?
I wish I could wrap it up in a bow and say, I typed to the end and I'm healed now. I don't think it's that simple, but I think I mentioned in the essay too, I continue to explore the dynamic between a narcissistic partner and a somewhat obsessive partner and how that plays out in different ways. And I've done that in a number of short stories in the Stradivarius. Even my novella that's coming out in the fall explores a couple dynamic like that. I think it's a healing journey, right? I see like the rainbow when I say like healing journey, like a graphic. Yeah, I think it gives me room to explore it, to look at things that could have gone differently, and to empathize, right? Like for myself. And I think the more I explore it, the more it feels less painful, right? And more just like something that has purpose because I found a way to bring it into my creative life and hopefully bring some other people joy or make them feel seen through my work. So I think it takes something terrible and gives it a second life with purpose.
So you were able to integrate it, but also share it so that other people could see how you experienced it and how you dealt with it. And that's a strength of horror, as you point out, which is that we can take bad things that happen to us and turn them into a vulnerability and a bridge to the reader to share experiences.
Yeah, it's like an invitation, right, to the reader in some ways.
Let's talk about next projects. I know you got them lined up and they've got titles and covers and collaborators. It sounds like this stuff is very real and imminent.
Merciless Waters is the name of my next work. It's a novella, also coming out from Brigadescape Press, and it's coming out this November. And I actually just saw a cover this week. So it's not revealed yet, but it's absolutely stunning. I cannot wait to do a cover reveal on that one. So Merciless Waters, I pitched as sapphic folk horror on a pirate ship. And it really started as just that strange mashup of ideas. I think I tweeted, "What about sapphic folk horror on a pirate ship?" And I got a really big response. And I was like, all right, I guess I'll try to make that a thing. And it had legs. When I fleshed
It
it
had
out,
sea legs.
it did, yeah. So it is not a pirate story. I always have to clarify that for people because people will think this is about pirates. It's not about pirates. It's just about sapphic women on a pirate ship. But really fun folk horror, loosely based on Rusalka lore. Are you familiar with Rusalka?
Normally, I like to ask my guests about their local lore, their local monsters, but since you're in Florida, and I've already covered the skunk ape, I thought, Rae would be a good person to talk about the Rusalka with. Can you explain what Rusalkas are and what their lore is?
Rusalka, it translates to mermaid, but they're not mermaids in the way we think about them as half woman, half fish on the bottom. The mythology varies a little bit depending on the region that you're talking about, because a number of regions have their own Rusalka lore. But sort of the amalgamation of it from the research that I've done is that these are women who were drowned or murdered by a partner in most cases, and they now are sort of banished to bodies of water. And they're very beautiful above the water, and they will sort of lure men into the water with their beauty. But when they're below the surface, their true selves show. So they're rotted corpses or skeletal below the water, which is just like the most metal thing that I can imagine. Incredible. And then they drown the men because they're hell bent on revenge. And revenge is a theme that I love to write about. So when I learned about Rusalka, I was like, I'm obsessed. So yeah, very cool mythology. They can come out on Green Week, it said, which is when they're sort of celebrated. Their hair, it gets a greenish hue when they're about to kill someone. I mean, lots of little nuances. I think the very earliest Rusalka lore, they were not vengeful and murderous, but they were actually sort of fertility figures. And then I think when Christianity came to the area and local, beliefs were sort of demonized, I think they took a more sinister turn in the mythology. But I wove that fertility possibility into Merciless Waters as well.
Wow. If anyone wants a taste, you have a short story available. You can find it at Rae's website. What's the name of that short story?
That is called Rusalmaya. It's on my website from Seize the Press, and it's free through their website. My website links to theirs. And yeah, that's a short story that I did, a slightly different take on the Rusalka.
It's good. I recommend it. And what's the project you have coming out after that book?
The thing that I'm working on now is editing an anthology, which will come out sometime after Merciless Waters. The anthology is called Scissor Sisters, and I'm co-editing that with April Yates. It is an anthology of sapphic villains aiming to reclaim the predatory lesbian trope. So it's a mix of erotic horror and historical horror and some body horror and some really incredible stories. So I'm really excited about that. That's going to be really fun. And the other sort of part of this sapphic horror series that we're doing through Brigid's Gate is a co-written novel that April and I put together called Lies That Bind, which is also erotic horror, and that's coming out beginning of 2024. It's very smutty, and I'm going to scream that from the rooftops just so everyone is very clear what they're walking into. I don't want someone who read the Stradivarius to go, oh, good, another book like the Stradivarius. It's certainly nothing like that. It is lots of sexual content and body horror.
On that topic of erotic horror, you are in charge of this new imprint called Lady Mantis Books.
I fell in love with erotic horror It was a while back now. Evelyn Freeling announced that she was going to be editing an anthology with Ghost Orchid called Les Petites Moors. And it's an anthology of erotic horror based on fairy tales. I wrote my first erotic horror piece that I've ever written for that call, and it was accepted, which is exciting. It comes out June 20th. But I absolutely fell in love with this subgenre and was really seeking out more erotic horror work, but really looking for erotic horror that did not skew splatterpunk. I feel like there's a good bit of the genre in the splatterpunk vein, but I sort of struggled to find what I was looking for, which was a little quieter, maybe a little more gothic leaning, a little more maybe historical, right? Not as sort of like loud splatterpunk, extreme gore. That's not sort of my taste, and I was struggling to find a lot of what I was looking for. So I got sort of the bug in my brain that, like, what if I asked Brigids Gate about an imprint, and told myself that was nuts and you can't do that for a long time. And then I finally just said, you know what, I'm going to ask them. And miraculously, they were into the idea. So we have submission guidelines on the website with the intention of publishing 4 novellas in 2025.
It's awesome that you sought out the opportunity and you made a path for yourself. And then it's incredible that it happened so quick and you're going to have 4 books coming out. That's very impressive. Wow.
And not me. Let me just clarify. I'm not writing the books, but I'll be editing them. So they will be in the world.
Yes,
Yeah.
you will be stewarding these books. That is really cool. So as we transition into some Halloweeny questions, I have to say that in chapter 12, your characters visit a fall festival. Everything about it was so inviting and sounded so delicious that I have to imagine that where you grew up, they had some really good Halloween festivities.
Yeah. So there is a fall festival near me that we go to every year. They have a hayride and sprawling pumpkin patches and scarecrows. It's just glorious. I'm a huge fan of Halloween. I take it the most seriously of all the holidays. So I had a lot of fun detailing that fall festival. I think it showed through that I love the season and the holiday.
It did, and it made me excited. Halloween's coming up. Do you have any trick-or-treating stories that stand out?
One stands out, I suppose. And it's not so much to do with Halloween, but here it goes. On Halloween, when I was growing up, I had a golf cart. I was maybe 15, 16, I don't know. So I thought I was very cool and taking all my friends, from neighborhood to neighborhood on this golf cart, all dressed up for Halloween. And of course, I'm a teenager, so I'm driving very recklessly. And it's Halloween, so it's night, it's dark. And I quickly took a turn onto a golf course and didn't see that it was chained closed. So the golf cart hit the chain, and the chain caught, if you're familiar with like the metal bracket that holds the roof on a golf cart, bent it immediately. I mean, in a fraction of a second, all the way in. And it stopped, maybe an inch from my best friend at the time's face. So it was almost really a Halloween horror story. Luckily, I slammed on the brakes and no one was hurt except the golf cart.
Wow, that's some Final Destination decapitation. Yikes.
Oh, yeah. No, it could have been bad. It could have been very bad. No, we weren't going very fast, but apparently fast enough.
Were you in Gator Country?
I am about 10 minutes from Gator Country. Very fun to drive out there every once in a while at night and hear them. They sound a little bit like frogs. It's a really cool place, the Everglades. I love it. So I'm right in between the Everglades and the beach. So kind of best of both worlds.
When you were growing up trick-or-treating, did you have to be on the lookout for gators?
I wouldn't say we're ever on the lookout for gators, but we don't go down near the canals. I wouldn't say it's like a day-to-day problem, but once in a while one gets in somebody's pool.
Do you have any spider stories?
Oh, so Yeah. Um, I've been married twice, and I'm currently married. So both my wife and my ex-husband, during the times of our marriages, have been bit by brown recluse spiders
Oh
in
no.
a way that it needed to be drained. And like,
Oh,
brown recluse are pretty poisonous, and pretty uncommon. They usually hang out in quiet places where no one goes. That's why they're called the recluse, because they're kind of shy. But I don't know. Something about maybe being with me. I don't know.
there's
They're
a
all getting
common
bitten.
denominator there, Ray.
I know. Luckily, I've not yet been bitten, but I have run into them a few times. And I also once ran into a black widow spider when I was in high school. So, yeah, we have spiders, and I'm not a fan. I have the fear of spiders for sure. I do have one other spider story. When I was in college, I went to college on the Gulf Coast of Florida, and that is swampland. One of our classes, do not ask me why they made us do this, but I swear it is the truth. They made us get into the swamp, into waist deep swamp. Free swamp, real swamp, not artificial. I don't know the liability. Anyway, we had to get in the swamp. And I'm in the swamp up about probably around my midsection. And I see this very strange and menacing looking web. And it was sort of shaped like a tornado, if you will. And I'm waist deep in the swamp. And that was it for me. I said, absolutely not. I'm out of here. So I get out and I look it up. And it's apparently like one of the most venomous spiders in the world.
Was it a Brazilian wandering spider?
Yes, that's exactly what it was.
That
Brazilian wandering spider.
is a dangerous spider.
And I don't even know if it's native to Florida.
It's
I don't
not.
think I've seen one since, but absolutely not. I lost my mind.
Wow, that was some really good instincts you had to A, spot it, and B, realize that that was not a normal web, and to get out of there. Yeah, that is like top 5 deadliest spiders in the world.
I know what a usual spider web looks like, and I saw this too. As if the water moccasins and the alligators weren't enough. I said, you can fail me if you want. I'm out of this one.
Just as an exercise, we've got 2 creatives here. What course could that have possibly been? Full immersive swampology.
It was something related to like appreciating the natural environment around us, something to that effect. I don't need to appreciate it that much. I can appreciate it from like
afar.
a distance, or like with some safety measures in place.
How to spot a Brazilian wandering spider. Man, that's quite an education you guys get in Florida.
Yeah, I could say a lot about that.
Rae, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This has been super fun.
Where can our listeners find more of your stuff?
I am most active on Twitter at _Rae Knowles. I also have a website, raeknowles.com, with the most recent updates about my work.
We look forward to all of the projects coming out next. All right. Talk to you soon, Rae.
Thank you.
Please subscribe and follow. Links are in the show notes. And you can find me at jeffccarter.com and hit the link to pick up my collection, We Bleed Orange and Black. 31 fun-sized tales for Halloween. Until next time, stay spooktacular.
I had no idea you were like a spider expert.
I'm just very scared